Okay, and welcome back. It is Wednesday, and we are going to take a look this hour at domestic politics with Webster Griffin Tarpley, in perhaps one of the most welcome statements ever by the putative president and commander-in-chief, the biggest fraud in American presidential history, the second worst president in history, right after George W. Bush, according to a recent poll, and things we could spend hours detailing. Barack Hussein Obama, also known as Barry Soetoro, BHO, or just plain BO, said, "This will be my last campaign, no matter what happens." You can almost hear the cheering in the background. Not sure what that means. Maybe Webster knows. Hello, Webster. Welcome back.
Hello, Jeff. That's fine. That's the devil you know. But then there's this other guy, the devil you don't know.
Yep.
And I'm afraid the ruling class is backing the devil you don't know. And you could see that already at the Bilderberger Group at the end of May, beginning of June, that the international finance oligarchs of the NATO, U.S. and North America to Europe area, they were clearly inclined to go for Romney and to dump Obama. And now in the meantime, with the money stacking up, right, that Romney gets $35 or $40 million more per month than Obama. I think that last month was the first time, maybe it was the first time in history, it was certainly an anomaly that the challenger would get more money coming in than the sitting president.
Well, he does. We have to remember also, and you do know this, and most of you listening know this, he has the formal endorsement of the State of Israel, and there is a huge... Romney. Yeah,
Romney. Romney has been
so he's got the money.
Hip with Netanyahu.
Yes, the money tap.
1976. I think that's a very important point. Yes, good that you bring it up. And maybe we should approach it from that point of view, right? I condemn both. Let me be very clear.
Let me stand right with you.
About Obama.
I'm right there.
Right? I've said everything there was to say about Obama with not one but two books.
We said
not much to add.
Webster, we said that on this program
in real time.
Before anybody else was saying it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so now we have Romney, and I think at least you should know before you throw yourself, in one direction or another, then know something about Romney, and know something about Ron Paul as the right wingman for Romney, and what that alliance actually represents, because I would say the roots of that alliance go back, a good 150 to 200 years in terms of the organizations that are being represented. But first of all, just on Romney, it was in 1976 that Willard alias Mitt Romney, Mormon activist, coming back from his Mormon discipleship in France, went to work for the Boston Consulting Group. And lo and behold, sitting in the next cubicle or something like this was Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu. And they have been in a kind of joined at the hip personal alliance ever since. And it means that when Bibi needs financial advice, he calls Mitt. So Bibi calls Mitt and says, I'm designing economic sanctions that we want to get other countries to support, to strangle and throttle Iran. How should we do it? And Mitt, of course, is happy to oblige with advice. And then when Mitt, after becoming a finance oligarch and hedge fund hyena and corporate raider and vulture capitalist, when he wanted to launch his political career after he got his $250 million of ill-gotten loot from wrecking companies, wrecking lives, and wrecking communities, he called Bibi to get political advice. So this is it's a kind of a revolving door. And even in the Republican presidential debates, about a year ago now, there is one of them where this issue comes up. It's where Gingrich called the Palestinians an artificial people. And Romney said, that may be, but I would never make any important statement about the Middle East without clearing it with my good friend Bibi Netanyahu. So he has pretty much told us that Netanyahu will be the arbiter of U.S. policy in the Middle East and maybe well beyond that if Romney gets into the White House. The other thing we have to remember is the neocons have been licking their wounds here for the past 4 years, right, since the Brzezinski gang more or less threw them out. And that really started even before the defeat of McCain in the election, right? When Bush-Cheney began to collapse really shortly after 2006, you could see that the neocons were leaving. So now we've got a whole new bunch of neocons. Not exactly new, but
well, and if I might point out also the obvious that Romney, seeking to curry favor with everything still above room temperature that can help him, has surrounded himself with a literal layer, a coterie of some of the most malignant, malevolent neocons, including Michael Chertoff, that you could think of.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I think, the leading ones that I can see are, first of all, Robert Kagan. Now, Kagan, this is a family of neocons, right? The father is a professor of classics. He's in the Leo Strauss tradition, right, perverting the political wisdom of Greece and Rome at Yale University. But then you have two brothers. One of them is at the American Enterprise Institute. I call him Field Marshal Kagan. He's this pudgy guy, and he designed the Iraq surge for Petraeus. But then at the same time, you've also got the other one, which is Robert Kagan, and he is the top foreign policy advisor to Mitt Romney. Now, this Kagan is he's at the Brookings Institution, so he's a hardcore neocon. A couple of others. Elliot Cohen from Johns Hopkins had become the top advisor to Condoleezza Rice towards the end. So he's on board. Then we have a guy called Robert Joseph, and if you don't remember him, you'll remember what he did. This is the famous, the famous 16 words about Niger yellow cake and Iraq looking for nuclear materials in Africa. And this was in the Bush State Union of 2002 or 3, maybe 3. Anyway, he's there, and you've got some others. Bolton, right, the walrus, John Bolton, the one who says that the UN should be destroyed, and so forth. So this is a slightly different set of neocons than the ones that have been burned up, right? You couldn't bring Wolfowitz forward anymore, especially after his raunchy revelations with this employee that he was linked to when he was kicked out of the World Bank, right? He was basically driven out. This is also interesting, though, because some people have argued that Wolfowitz was running the world. Well, I'm afraid not. He couldn't run the world. Couldn't even run the World Bank, right?
He couldn't even run his own zipper.
Well, but he was Watergated out, right? He was driven out, and a lot of countries refused to have him come. I mean, they just said, "Don't come here. We're not talking to you anymore." So that's the Romney foreign policy team. I think he's got a group of foreign policy advisors that numbers in the dozens, and the estimate is that about 70% of them are Bush-era neocons.
Right.
So that's what you're going to get. Now, the other thing, though, with Romney is the following. Let us stipulate at the beginning that the foreign policy for Romney is going to be run by neocons with Netanyahu as the ultimate arbiter of what they then do. But then there's this broad area of domestic policy and, above all, economics, which is likely to be the decisive thing. And what can we tell about this? Now, here's the thing that I would point to. We've got the transition team for Romney already named, which is a very, very strange thing. Very early to do this, so maybe we should address this when your pause is over.
That is interesting, and the fact that he has so heavily loaded his train with neocon freight is pretty disgusting.
Yeah, it is. It shows you this bleak choice that we have here. It's really no choice. Don't choose. Do something different.
Yeah. All right. We'll be right back with Webster in just a minute. Okay, back with Webster and taking a look at the current political terrain here, which really looks rather like the terrain around Fukushima. It's anyway. Go ahead.
It's certainly a grim seen, and I point this out because I'm trying to stress the vanity, the idiocy, really, of committing to either one of these, and even to do it sort of in objective terms. I wouldn't do that. The way out that I've always proposed is that there's got to be some organized alternative that says no to the Republican reactionaries and no to the Wall Street Democrats, and I think that's even more urgent than it's ever been. And you can see what you're getting with Romney is in terms of foreign policy, and it's foreign policy that the neocons are interested in. That's going to be a very narrowly based approach, right? It's not going to be even what does big oil want or what does any number of other interest groups. It's going to be what do the neocons want, and at the top of that, Netanyahu will be the arbiter. But now again, let's look at the other side. What about domestic and above all economic? Because I think that will be equally or more important. And here we see the following. We see that Romney has departed from tradition, which is you don't usually name your transition team director until after you've won the election. And you can think about in the case of Obama, it was this guy Jim Johnson, big activist of the trilateral Bilderberg axis, he was then forced out because of irregularities in terms of mortgage deals that he'd gotten, right? Sweetheart deals, things like this. So that was somebody that Obama named in towards mid-November after he'd won the election. Romney has already named his transition director, and it's a guy called Mike Leavitt. Ever hear of him? Mike Leavitt, Leavitt.
Doesn't exactly roll off my tongue of memory.
Well,
no.
He's the former governor of Utah, and he is a Mormon activist. He is a Mormon to the 10th power. Mm-hmm. And this, I think, is very, very ominous for what the domestic policy would look like. Mm-hmm. In the sense that the transition team director, what does he do? He distributes the plums. There's this interesting publication, you can get it here, in the bookshop, so it's called the Plum Book. And the Plum Book lists all of the political appointments that a president gets to make. Uh-huh. Some jobs are controlled by civil service process and other things, but there are some that are political appointments, and there are, thousands and thousands of these. Who is going to get those? Well, we have to assume now that Mike Leavitt, Mormon, is in the process of deciding who's going to get those jobs. And I think I can give a pretty good guess, given a certain amount of study of Mormonism and its history. And
Let's guess.
They're going to be Mormons.
Gosh,
in other words, you're going to
Webster, you floored me with that one.
You're going to have a foreign policy of neocons.
The huntsman.
And a domestic policy with Mormons, And it's the clique that sits at the top of this is the Romney Huntsman Marriott clique. Because remember, Willard Romney is Willard because of the family's friendship for J. Willard Marriott, who built this empire, right? Starting with the so-called hot shops here in the Washington and Virginia area. There were these little kind of, places to eat, but low cost. The hot shops, right? That was the Washington equivalent. So starting from the hot shops, the Marriotts then built this huge empire. And the corporate headquarters is not far from here. It's in the suburbs of southern Maryland, right? Not far from Washington, D.C. So he's Willard Romney because of J. Willard Marriott. So that's somebody in the background. And then Huntsman, this is a billionaire family. And Huntsman, the guy that you saw in the primaries, that guy was Romney's cousin, also a Mormon. And he was the left wingman, right? This was the one who had been the ambassador to China and could speak Chinese and got in trouble with the racist Republicans because they didn't like any presidential candidate speaking Chinese, right? And I think Ron Paul actually put out the ad that attacked him for speaking Chinese. So you're going to get a domestic policy apparatus, which I think is going to be heavily weighted with Mormons. Now, what does that mean? If you watch the U.S. propaganda concerning Syria, you know what it is, right? They say Syria is bad because the Assad regime and the Ba'ath Party are all Alawites, and they're a minority in this country where you have Sunnis as the majority, and you've also got Christians, and you've got Kurds, and you've got Druzes, and you've got all sorts of other people. Now, I think this is exaggerated. I don't share this propaganda, but you see the stereotype that they're trying to invoke is that if you have a religious or ethnic minority that's ruling over a larger group, that can sometimes lead to problems. And I think the idea is, as far as I can tell, is that on the domestic side, Romney's task is, let us say, to impose a cut of 25% or thereabouts in the already slashed U.S. standard of living. And it's easier to do that if your administration has a very narrow base so that you don't get pulled off course by the protests of various interest groups that are getting whacked in the process. Is that part clear?
Got it.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very narrowly based thing.
Well,
Neocon foreign policy, Mormon domestic policy, and to hell with everybody else.
And I do, again, point back to the recall of perhaps arguably the most powerful ambassadorial professional in the world, and that would be, of course, John Huntsman, the ambassador to Beijing. They brought him back, sent him off on this wild goose chase, put him on the shelf, and I do believe the way he entered and exited was symptomatic, Webster, I think you may agree, of a deal that he has.
Absolutely. He was the left-wing man. He was the counterpoint to Ron Paul.
That's right. Very good. All right, we'll be right back in just a couple. Back with Webster Tarpley. Glad you're along tonight. Okay, Webster, that's a pretty astute survey of the so-called Republican side. Let's carry on. And
let's take a look now at this Ron Paul issue, because I think the last time we talked was about 5 weeks ago. And in the meantime, Ron Paul and Rand Paul have taken off the mask, and they have shown themselves to be, I think, pretty much what I've been saying about them since January, or actually really earlier. Once Ron Paul published his economic program, this Restore America program, where he says we're going to take the food stamp budget and we're going to cut that by 63%. So the people who have no welfare, because Clinton took that away, they have no job, they have no unemployment benefit, they have no health care. The only thing keeping 50 million Americans alive is food stamps, and Ron Paul comes along and says, I'm going to cut that by almost two-thirds. That is a recipe for genocide against the American people. That will kill Americans, and I don't really care anything you say after that point, right? Once you're advocating genocide against this people, because that's what it means, the argument is over, and it has to be rejected, because it's fascism. There's no other way to put it, and probably we could find even more choice terms.
Right.
So that's what he put out. That's this Restore America plan, which he published for the first time, I believe, in late October of last year, and it goes through other aspects of his economics, that he really wants to cut the Pentagon almost not at all. Actually, compared to Obama plus automatic sequestration, Ron Paul would cut the Pentagon zero, but he would cut Medicaid by 35 to 40%, all kinds of child nutrition programs, child health programs would get destroyed, and above all, this food stamps, right, which is, again, 50 million Americans, 50 million of the people you see around you, right, 1/6 or 1/7 of everybody you see on the street is getting their survival thanks to this. So that's Ron Paul. But now let's look at the logic of the campaign, right? In a nutshell, Romney knew that he was a weak candidate, right? He had seen how weak he was in 2008. He couldn't carry the day.
Uh-huh.
So this time he went into the Republican primary with two wingmen. And we've discussed Huntsman as the left or moderate wingman, and then Ron Paul as the right wingman. And the point of Ron Paul in particular was, in the Republican primary, you might have 40% or thereabouts of country club affluent Republicans, people who are making a lot of money and are inclined to vote for the establishment. That would be Romney's vote. But that then left 60% anti-establishment, Tea Party, crazed petty bourgeoisie, whatever you want to call them, that would be available for something else. So the danger for Romney was that if that 60% coagulated around anybody to challenge him, like a Santorum or a Gingrich at different times, that would be enough to knock out Romney. So what Ron Paul contributed to Romney was principally the structural fact of taking 10 to 15% of the vote in many states, sometimes as much as 17%, sometimes less, depending on the phase, taking those votes off the table so that they would never go to a candidate who might actually win the Republican nomination, because Ron Paul can't do that. And the reason that he can't do it is he's profiled as the guy who wants to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all the other economic rights of the American people. And if you look at the polls, the most recent one says, are cuts in Medicare acceptable? 80% say no. Are cuts in Social Security acceptable? 80% say no to that. Ron Paul is Mr. Destroy them both, whether quickly or slowly or whatever it is, but it's clear that's what he wants to do. So that's his ceiling. But Romney, and that's actually an advantage, because Romney knows that Ron Paul will never get strong enough so they could actually win the Republican primaries. Anybody who thought that needed their head examined. They should take up stamp collecting as a hobby, right, and forget about politics, because they have no aptitude for it. But to take 15% off the table means that then it's going to be very hard to defeat Romney. And if you look at a couple of these cases, the Michigan primary, which was one that Romney had to win because of the family's roots there, right? George Romney, president of American Motors Auto Company. Romney won that by, 1 or 2%. And I think, can be attributed to the Ron Paul vote and the ads that Ron Paul ran attacking Santorum, who by that time was the main rival. You've also got the fact that as everybody could see, should have seen at the time, in the Republican debates, Ron Paul was the screening force for Romney. Anybody attacking Romney, Ron Paul would counterattack him. There were even statistics that Ron Paul never attacked Romney, and then he attacked the other ones 70 or 80 times, and there's even a statistical breakdown how often he attacked Gingrich, Santorum, he attacked Bachmann when she seemed to be a threat, and so forth. So there's no doubt. That's the only thing that was involved here was that. And then, of course, the payoff was, for the Ron Paul people, was Little Rand. Little Rand, the racist frat boy, and I say racist because he's now attacking the District of Columbia. Uh-huh. He's acting just like a Dixiecrat, reactionary, racist senator. These people have always done it. He could be Jesse Helms. He could be Trent Lott. He could be, any of these characters, right? You name one. What he's just done in the past 10 days or so is Little Rand has objected and blocked the District of Columbia getting control of their own budget, because Little Rand has ideological points about abortion and gun control that he wants to impose on the largely black population of Washington, D.C. So these people are acting more and more like the reactionary, racist Republicans that they are, right? There's nothing libertarian about this. It's also interesting. States' rights? Well, how about, the District of Columbia? Do they have states' rights? I guess he'd say, oh, no, they're not a state. But that's an idiotic question.
What about the feelings between father and son? What's your take on that?
Nepotism. In other words, that the goal of this thing is, from Ron Paul's point of view, is he's a nepotist. The statistics that I've seen is that he's got a total of 61 family members on the payroll, either of his congressional office or of the election campaign.
That's enormous. Jesse Benton is
61. He's the champion. Yeah. He's beating everybody in the House and Senate in terms of nepotism.
Jesse Benton, $500,000 profit.
Jesse Benton is married to his granddaughter, right?
Right.
That's Jesse Benton and all these other characters, right? These a lot of them are incompetent, but a lot of them also have a certain amount of cunning. And a lot of them are Freemasons, because this is the main thing. What is Ron Paul? What's the organized force behind it? It is the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasons, the Dixiecrats, the Confederates, the people who gave you secessionism and Civil War. They gave you Jim Crow, the Redeemers, right? The people who were going to impose racial segregation after the Civil War. It's one of the most evil bodies of opinion in American history, and that's what Ron Paul represents. with his racist newsletters, with his hatred of Martin Luther King, voting against him repeatedly, the holiday, with his still, both of them say the 1964 Civil Rights Act is unconstitutional because property rights trump human rights. In other words, if I own a hotel, I can keep anybody out that I want to. No. We have a direct quote from Abraham Lincoln that when property rights and human rights are in conflict, human rights trump property rights. That's the American view. This is the Confederate view that we get from Ron Paul. But now, here's the thing. What is the historical basis for the convergence between Romney and Ron Paul, Rand Paul? It's interesting. It is that these are the forces not just of racism, but also of secessionism. And this goes back to the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, and you can see the same things at work.
Uh-huh. Very good. All right. Excellent. Rand Paul has not come away from this as an inspiring figure, Webster.
No.
By any measure. And actually, it's a pitiable thing to behold, frankly, from just an
because
observer's.
what he did was, we had the Bilderberger meeting here, and in the course of the Bilderberger meeting, I got engaged in some debates with different people, right? Some leading libertarians and other, radio personalities and others. You can see them. You can go to tarpley.net and see them all, and I hope you do. And what I basically said is what I've just gone through, that Ron Paul and Rand are the wingmen for Romney, that Ron Paul's job is to make sure that Romney gets the nomination, and if it goes the way he wants, if Romney needs Ron Paul's delegates to put him over the top, the price for that will be putting little Rand on the ticket. Now, that hasn't panned out that way. In other words, it didn't really go the way Ron Paul wanted, because Romney has now pretty much made the nomination on his own power, as far as we could see, so that the chances for little Rand are anybody's guess, and maybe they're not so great. But the goal of this, for the Ron Paul clan, was to put little Rand in reach of the White House. That's what they want. On the basis of what? That he's a little racist frat boy from Baylor University from the Nosy Brotherhood, right?
Yeah,
the Nosy Brotherhood, the Aqua Buddha.
Yep.
Nosy, Nazi, what's the difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's little Rand. But now, again, back to the historical roots. If you were Abraham Lincoln in 1861, or even if you were James Buchanan a little bit before that, right, President of the United States, you had two things to deal with in terms of the future survival of the United States. One is the actions of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite Freemasons. Because you look at this, you see Jefferson Davis and Alexander Stephens and Robert Toombs and Yancey and Judah Benjamin and Lamar, and the entire Confederate leadership had one common denominator. They're from the Scottish Rite Southern Freemasons. Right? It was really organized out of Cincinnati, although the headquarters has now moved here to Washington, D.C. So these are your Dixiecrats, right? They brought you secessionism, and of course they're Scottish. They're allied to the British. They're a feature of the British Empire, right? At the height of the power of the British Empire, between 1848 and 1870. That's why this happened when it happened. But then there's this other group, which is the Mormons, and the Mormons, of course, have been founded in upstate New York in the so-called burned over area, right near Palmyra, right? It's between the Erie Canal and the lake up there. So this is Joseph Smith, and this, he deserves plenty of attention on his own because he's the prophet, right? The creator of this religion. But the thing that he introduces into this religion that gets them in trouble is, of course, polygamy, right? It's estimated, let's see, by sources that are sympathetic, in other words, scholars that are sympathetic to Joseph Smith, argued that he had only 33 wives with 7 possible wives, and essentially that's it. So he gets up to 33 to 40 wives.
Well, see, now the conspiracy people would jump in and say, aha, 33rd degree.
Yes,
that's why.
There is that, because he is officially a Freemason. In other words,
right.
He's 1,000% confirmed as a Freemason, he puts Freemasonic symbols all over his temple, in different temples that he's put up, or his tradition has put up. You can really look at Mormonism and say, is it a religion or is it a Freemasonry? In other words, is it primarily religious with a Freemasonic overlay, or is it primarily Freemasonic with a religious overlay? That I guess you can leave up to individual taste. But the principal scholar, who is not so favorable to the Mormons, estimates that Joseph Smith had 48 wives, and according to some that are even more aggressive in the research, he gets up to 84 wives. Now that's polygamy, right? That's polygamy with a vengeance. And I would also point out that not only is Joseph Smith polygamous, but from his point of view, he's carrying on polygamy with this large group of women. But since a lot of them are married, from the point of view of these women, they're in a relationship of polyandry. In other words, they've got their husband, and then they've got their spiritual husband, Joseph Smith, to whom they may be sealed in the temple so that they spend eternity with him. So, polygamy and polyandry. Now, in the Victorian era, this did not go over too well. So, this is the ultimate cause. Well, there are one or two others, but this is probably the principal one of why you have these riots and indeed shooting wars, you might say, involving the Mormons and their inability to get along. It's also got to do with the fact that they are a theocracy. Wherever they go, they create a civil power which is indistinguishable from the religious one. Right? Joseph Smith and later Brigham Young are theocrats. They're grand ayatollahs who run the show, not just in religion but also in politics and military affairs. Joseph Smith is the prophet. He's the king of the kingdom of God. Now that sounds like a great old American tradition, to be a king of the kingdom of God, starting from Nauvoo, Illinois. This is very, very strange stuff. So you've got all that going on. By the 1850s, it's no longer Joseph Smith because he was assassinated by a mob in 1844. But now it's Brigham Young, and you know Brigham Young, right? There was a huge campaign for Brigham Young done in the 50s and 60s about what a great guy he was, right, to rehabilitate this entire tradition. From the point of view of Lincoln, you were dealing not with one form of secessionism, but at least two. And the second one was the Mormons. It's the state of Deseret. It was created really as an independent state, an inland empire, that was going to block the access of the United States to the Pacific and indeed cut off communications to California. If you want to have a transcontinental telegraph, got to go through Utah. If you want to have a transcontinental railroad, right? The point at which they came together was
the Golden Spike.
Provo, right? Yeah. Provo, Utah, the Golden Spike. So Utah is geostrategic. And if I'm the British Empire and I want to prevent the United States from becoming a Pacific power, I think I can detach California, I can seize Alaska, I can do some other things, then the Mormons are the way to go. I have to recall Professor Ali Mazaheri was an Iranian scholar working in Paris in the late 80s and early 90s, now passed away. He was, I believe he was a professor at the École des Hautes Études Sociales in Paris, and he's the author of a book called La Route de la Soie, The Silk Road. It's a very, very fascinating subject. But he said there were three miracles of the Victorian age. One was Karl Marx, British agent. Another was the Bab, the founder of the Baha'i religion. This was a way to take Muslims and tone them down so that they could become British colonial administrators, because a Muslim would not be allowed to work for infidels, but a Baha'i would do it. So Karl Marx, the Bab, and Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was the guy who created a religious organization just at the point, the time, the place where the British Empire was well served by this. So in the late 1850s, there was every reason to think that Brigham Young, who had moved everybody out there, right, this is the place, Salt Lake City, Salt Lake, that this was preparing to secede. And indeed, President Buchanan, not a good guy, sent an army commanded by Albert Sidney Johnson, who went on to become a famous Confederate general. He's the one who was killed at Shiloh in the fight with Grant. But he led an army out there because Mormonism was considered to be in the process of seceding. So we've got the racist level, which is that the southern jurisdiction of Scottish Rite Freemasons are obviously racist. There's no doubt about that. In the Mormon theology, anybody black is thought to be a Lamanite. They're the descendants of the angels who refused to choose sides between the good and the evil, or between Christ and Lucifer in the battle in heaven. They have a slightly different, or a very, very different version of it. But the people that are black are cursed because of this. And as Romney has been forced to admit, until 1978, you really couldn't be a Mormon if you were black. I mean, they say you couldn't be in the priesthood, but that's pretty much all of them, right? It's pretty much everybody.
Right.
So Romney spent the first 30 years of his life in a religion which was implicitly racist. I mean, overtly racist. And it's also interesting that the Romney family fled to Mexico for the purpose of practicing polygamy.
That's right. I remember that. I hadn't heard that for a long time. You're right.
Yeah. That they spent several generations in Mexico in a Mormon colony there because, by God, the dispensation was that polygamy was the way to go. Now, the issue of polygamy was it was alive in 1862, right? You know, Justin Morrill, right? They're a very good guy. The Morrill Act is the land grant colleges, right? It basically says that if you're going to have the sale of public lands, then a certain amount of that is going to be set aside to fund public education. Big plus for the United States. And the Morrill tariff, the protective tariff that put the U.S. on the road to industrialization and world industrial leadership, that's the Morrill tariff. So this is a very famous guy from Vermont. But he also did a law which says polygamy is forbidden. Bigamy and polygamy are forbidden in the United States, and that was later upheld by the Supreme Court. It took until 1896, approximately, for the Mormons to give up polygamy, at least formally, so that they could be admitted into the United States. So, not so good for women, certainly not so good for blacks, and above all with this element of secessionism. And you can see that the common ground is that Brigham Young was a secessionist. He was a traitor. There's just no doubt about it. You can go back and read the letters and the reports of Union General Connor, an Irishman, born in Ireland but now working for the Union Army. He's got this garrison of about 1,000 men right on the hill above Salt Lake City, and it's thanks to this guy Connor that at various points in 1862 and 1863, Brigham Young was deterred because he knew that if he tried to secede or start anything, he would have to deal with this force, and he could have overwhelmed them, but then that would, of course, set up a tremendous retaliation on the part of the United States. So, in those days, the saying was, there are two barbarous relics that we have to deal with: slavery and polygamy. And slavery was the South, and polygamy was Deseret, right? And when you think of Utah, it's much bigger. It goes all the way to Sacramento. It goes to San Bernardino. It goes to the very lower Colorado River, a place called Colville. Goes way up into Idaho. Goes Wyoming. Lots of these places.
This is a nice piece of real estate.
Great basin.
Yep.
So that's the basis. In other words, when you saw Romney, when Ron Paul was running interference for Romney, what you saw was an alliance which was exactly the same combination of racism and treason that you would have seen from the point of view of Lincoln in 1861 or 1862, because they were essentially, the way it would have worked is this. The reports from this guy Connor are quite clear. He says Brigham Young is waiting if the United States undergoes some kind of catastrophic military defeat, or if the British intervene, then he will attempt to to take over the Great Basin. In other words, he'll secede, he'll cut the telegraph, he'll prevent the railroad, he'll do all these other things. So that's what it was. And that, I think, puts this entire question into perspective. In other words, it's not a chance. It's not just opportunistic, right? That they want to get Rand Paul on the ticket or something, but that this is a kind of a convergence of some of the negative forces in American history, and that it's got a long background. But it's happening now because, of course, we're in this breakdown crisis where we've got these atavistic phenomena. In other words, the horrible things from the past that we thought we had, gone by, are now coming back because of the way that civilization is tending to collapse around us.
That's what that noise is?
What do you mean?
The noise of collapse?
I guess so. I guess the rivets are beginning to pop. Anyway, I hope people take a look at Tarpley.net, and I'll talk about this on my own. I have more time on my own radio programs, but this is sort of the idea. And there's much to say about Joseph Smith, much to say about Brigham Young, and you take it from there.
Thank you, Webster. That was really excellent, as always.
Okay. See you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.